who had an accident yesterday and has ended up in hospital. So really appreciate Carol trekking on. And I met her, I don't know when I met you, 5 years ago, Carol, maybe? Longer. I lose track.
At least 5.
Smoking too much weed. Anyway, Carol's been at the forefront of the epilepsy mob in Australia and immediately embraced medical cannabis because it can be fantastic for people with epilepsy. I've had extraordinary experiences with, especially parents with children, where immediately, seizures can stop in some cases. It's like a miracle. And I think it was one of the big things that made everyone feel so bad about the cannabis laws when they saw young children's seizures being stopped. Who was going to argue about that? So she's on various government committees trying to help us get cannabis into a sane level. But particularly I do think the epileptic thing was a no-brainer for people. No one could argue against children using cannabis for epilepsy, and it broke a lot of bricks out of the big walls. So really appreciate you coming today. So sorry about yesterday's drama, and thanks Els for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Hi everyone.
I'll leave you alone, Joe.
You'll leave me alone?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, Michael said I immediately embraced the idea of cannabis. Not quite. Not quite. And I'll tell you a little bit about, I guess, the story of my education. But let me say, I'm the mum of 4 kids in their 30s now. And they think it is absolutely hysterical that mum is a cannabis advocate. Absolutely hysterical. But, come from a conservative organisation, a bunch of nurses, including my mate that Michael's just talked about. They're conservative people, nurses. And, if I go back 5-6 years ago and we first heard that cannabis could make a difference to people with epilepsy, we were pretty horrified, actually. And said, no, there's nothing in that. That's just going to cause harm. And it did take some education, and I'll speak about that. Now, sister, I should just work out, do I have control of this, or do I sort of nod at you, or...
No, just talk to me and just say next slide. And when it comes to the movies, just be patient and I'll set it up.
Okay, but you're okay for me to say next slide, please, and things like that. All right. All right, now, the presentation I've got here, I sometimes do over an hour and a half, and so it's quite long, and I'm not going to do that today. We don't have the time, so I may skip through some things pretty quickly, and we'll see how we go and what I can cover. But, yep, go ahead. So, thank you, sister. So, I just want to say a little bit about epilepsy, although I'm going to be talking about things that are not specific to epilepsy in a lot of cases. It's really about people with medical conditions. But I do work for Epilepsy Action Australia, and the World Health Organisation says it is doubtful if there's any other medical condition so universally neglected as epilepsy. And those of you that were staying in the room over lunch would see it's a very, very old known condition, as is cannabis, a very, very long known substance. So it's quite interesting that 2 stigmatised subjects too, if you like, have come together. Next slide, thanks, sister. 65 million people in the world are living with epilepsy. And so it's not rare. In Australia, around 250,000 people are diagnosed with epilepsy. So it's about 1% of the population. The interesting thing with epilepsy, though, is people have the wrong idea about it. They think that it's either a medical condition for which you get a pill, you take the pill and you're all right. And for some people, that's the case. They get something that will help them. At the other end, they think it's a psychiatric condition, a mental health issue, and it's not. It's a very physical condition. And around 30% of people with epilepsy are currently not helped by the available anti-epileptic medications. So of that 250,000 people, 30% of them go on to have seizures, often on a daily basis, and it can be really debilitating. I'll introduce you to some of those patients in a short while. Next slide, please. So, as I said, about 250,000, 30 to 35% not helped. And again, thanks, sister. Okay, very, very quickly, Epilepsy Action Australia operates nationally. We have a network of some 60 nurses around Australia. We have an epilepsy nurse line, so we're answering the phone to people 9 to 5, 7 days a week on that epilepsy nurse line. We also deliver education into the community, and we're involved in research as well. Thank you. Next slide, please, sister. Oh, maybe that, no, that's okay. The things that we do, I'll just add there, advice, education training and so on. Now, where did this whole thing start in terms of cannabis and epilepsy? So it started around 2013 when people started to hear about this young girl called Charlotte Figge. Now, Charlotte has a condition called Dravet syndrome. It's a form of epilepsy, but it's a very devastating form of epilepsy. The child has many, many seizures. Some of the children don't live to their teenage years. They have cognitive disability, developmental problems and so on, a really devastating syndrome. And over in the United States, the parents of young Charlotte actually were told about cannabis and gave Charlotte a designer strain of the drug, and one that was higher in CBD, that you've heard mentioned, lower in THC. Charlotte's doing well today. So, in a very short while, her seizures stopped and she's going really, really well. Next slide, please. But the reality about medical cannabis. These are the ways that people access cannabis in Australia. If I look up the top, mail order. So people are putting in orders to overseas companies, and for the most part, they're receiving their packages in the mail today. That's still the case. Some families are going overseas. They're actually going to where they can get the medicine legally, and some people are at the point of basically mortgaging their homes and doing all sorts of things to make these trips to Canada and the United States. Some are accessing what they call the black market, and I prefer to call it the green market. And I don't need to tell you anything about that. I'm sure you're hearing plenty of that today. And some people are growing their own and making their own oils and tinctures and the like. That's the reality in Australia today. Next slide, please. What do we know about attitudes? There have been lots of surveys done. We've done some, and some big survey companies have done some. Invariably, over 90% of people in the community say that we should have ready access to medical cannabis, and it certainly shouldn't be against the law. So that's the attitude of many, but it's not straightforward. Next slide, please. I want to introduce you to some of the people who actually did educate me and help change my attitude over the years. So this young fellow here is Jai. Jai Whitelaw, and I'm okay to use his name because his mum is a very open, sort of cannabis advocate. But Jai, if you look at that photo in 2012, Jai has multiple seizure syndromes, what we call seizure syndromes. He was on 35 tablets per day. He was taking all of the known anti-epileptic medications at one time or another that could be tried. He was taking steroids, benzodiazepine, and a whole range of other things. The doctors were trying all sorts of things to try and stop Jai's seizures. I knew this little boy back in those days, and I thought, this kid is going to die. They can't stop the seizures. He is really, really sick. Lives in Queensland at the moment. Dad's in the Defence Force, so they move around a bit. And he's in security in the Defence Force. You could imagine using an illicit cannabis product was not something that was on their mind. But this little guy was non-verbal. You can see his face swollen up. He was having falls when he could move around. Mostly he was in a wheelchair, but if he did get up and move a little bit, he'd fall and he'd break bones and hurt himself and so on. He couldn't control his bowels. He couldn't control his body temperature. He was just so sick. He was drooling, couldn't sleep. Really sick little boy. Resuscitation was something that sort of had to happen in the family. Four older siblings, and they all needed to know CPR because, Jai was just off to hospital all the time and needing resuscitation. Somebody gave Michelle, his mum, and I believe it might have been in this neck of the woods, somebody gave Michelle some illicit cannabis, and they were horrified at first. As I said, Dad in the Defence Force, he was the breadwinner and so on. But Jai was so sick that one day he came home and said, just do what you need to do. Let's try it. Everything else has been tried. Within hours, Jai's convulsive seizures stopped. So he was having 500 seizures a day. Some of them were the ones you could see, convulsive, falling to the ground and so on. Some of them were not. They were what we call subclinical seizures, so they were measured. But as I said, the ones you could see stopped within hours. Then there was the odd seizure over in the next couple of weeks. And then there were no seizures for 2.5 years. Now, things can and do go wrong. I mean, his mum from the very outset was vocal, was letting people know, was going to the health minister, was writing to the premier, was doing all sorts of things, saying we need accessible medical cannabis through our doctors. So she was a real advocate, remains a real advocate today. But things can go wrong. We don't know quite what happened, whether there was some contamination or something wrong, but Jai did get sick from the oil that he was on after 2.5 years. Went back into hospital. And of course, what did they say? Well, no more cannabis. He cannot have cannabis. We can't treat him if he has cannabis. So they stopped the oil that he was on, straight back into all of the seizures, back onto the benzodiazepines and the steroids and the anti-epileptic medications as well. Very, very sick. We lobbied very, very hard with the Queensland government, talked to the Premier and various others. And Jai was finally given a legal medical cannabis product through the hospital. Bad luck that he then had an allergy to the carrier oil and got sick again, but he is actually now on a medicinal product delivered through the hospital, and he's on monotherapy. That means no other medication. The only medication he is on now is a CBD oil, and prescribed through the hospital. Took a long time, took a very long time. You can see his progress, up there now he's cooking. He couldn't go to school back in 2012, but he's now a sort of an active schoolboy. He has deficits, he will always have deficits, in part from the number of seizures, probably some from the medicines. But overall, Jai's a happy young fellow. Next slide, please, sister. Young Lindsay Carter here. Again, I only name people who are willing to be named. So, in fact, Lindsay was the first patient to ever get Commonwealth Government approval for botanical cannabis. He actually got approval for the bud. And he has a brain tumour and also has epilepsy as a result of that brain tumour. And so he was able to vaporise the bud to help with his nausea. He had nausea and vomiting and so on. But he needed some other forms of cannabis too. He needs some other forms of cannabis as well. And this is one of the families that travelled overseas, I think 5 times. And when they went overseas, he could actually get the medicine that he required. Let me just pause to say, we don't know what we don't know. We all know that cannabis is a useful medicine, but I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of really understanding it from a medicinal point of view. We hope that one day we'll get to the point where there's very personalised medicine in Australia, and we'll know exactly what form of cannabis, which strain, and which of the more than 100 cannabinoids and terpenes will make a difference, and so on. Lindsay needs particular forms of cannabis, and as I said, they were only able to get exactly what he needed in either Canada or the United States. His mum, Lene, is like a cannabis expert that you wouldn't believe. We at Epilepsy Action ring her to ask her for information because she is so well educated. She's self-educated in terms of understanding, because if your young son has a brain tumour and has epilepsy, you are going to find out everything you possibly can. And that's what she's done. Lindsay's not out of the woods yet, but you know what happens if he's on the right types of cannabis, the tumour shrinks, the epilepsy stops, the seizures stop. Once he goes off, you know, then he's got the problems again. Next slide, please, sister. That's just a quick, if you can see that. Over here at image 1, that white mass is before Lindsay was treated with cannabis, that white area. He actually got the right cannabis he needed. The second scan, the second slide there, is after cannabinoid treatment in the USA. The medicine ran out, you can only bring a certain amount back. The medicine ran out, you can see it starting to grow again. As soon as he started taking the cannabis, it shrinks again. So one of the things that is quite upsetting is when you hear there's no evidence. You know, the little guy that I spoke about probably has the best documented case of epilepsy in Australia, I'd say, just about, you know, all his syndromes and seizure types and so on. Next slide, please, sister. Look, I've got a little video here, and we might just show you Michaela's story rather than me talking.
2 seconds.
Not that one, sister.
No, wait 2 seconds. I got it.
Michaela's from Perth.
This was 13-year-old Michaela's reality just last month.
So she will vocalise, she'll scream a lot. She tries to relieve the pain in her head by banging her head on the headrest of her wheelchair or anything that's within reach.
Born with a severe and rare neurological condition, Michaela suffers up to 100 seizures a day, some so bad they put her in hospital.
In the early years, we were admitted probably every 2 to 3 months in what was called a seizure crisis, where her seizures would escalate to a point and the medications that I used at home no longer had any impact.
What has made a difference is medicinal cannabis. After a lengthy approval process, Michaela was granted a prescription, one of only 33 Western Australian patients. The CBD oil doesn't contain THC, which is the psychoactive compound in the plant.
Her whole demeanour has completely changed. She's gone from being stressed, anxious, uncomfortable, miserable, don't touch me, to being calm and relaxed.
But the high dose required doesn't come cheap. Her family now faces losing their home to pay for the drug.
Each bottle has 25 mils in it, and that is a 6.5 day supply for Michaela, and each bottle costs $533.
With
Thanks, sister. Obviously, we've challenged the video equipment a little bit there, sorry, but that's a news story. I know this family quite well, and at the time when they were getting a legal prescription of cannabis for Michaela, our families were telling us that they were being quoted around $50,000 per year. It's unfortunately, with epilepsy, the amount you need is sort of higher than for other conditions, and so it's on body weight. So if you've got a fairly big child and you need quite a lot of cannabis, that's the kind of figures that they were telling us. Next slide, please, sister. Okay, so issues for access, if you're talking about getting that through the medical system at the moment, we still know that the medical doctors are unfamiliar with cannabis and are unconfident with cannabis, even though technically your GP can now prescribe cannabis. Many of them won't. And, you know, when they had their training, there was nothing in there about the endocannabinoid system. Let's face it, all we've ever heard about from back in those times is the harm of cannabis. And so it's actually quite difficult to get a conversation going with most GPs. Can I just ask, have any of you tried to talk to your doctor? Yeah? Have any of you had any success?
In
Couple.
Queensland, they have to have some kind of government
Yeah.
thing. to
Government
go and
approval.
prescribe
Yep.
it, and apparently it's an 18-month process.
Yeah. Well, things have technically improved. But, you know, as I said, we're still hearing mostly from patients that their doctor says, no, there's nothing to that. You know, one end don't believe, wouldn't touch it at one end. But even at the end where they're quite keen to understand more, they don't know enough yet is what they're saying. We know that research is needed. Of course research is needed, but, you know, this research takes a lot of time and it's costly. One of the things that I've noticed is different in Australia to, say, the United States is I can see that a lot of doctors, and I've met quite a few of them in the United States, are learning as they go. You know, I think at the break I saw something about the safety profile of cannabis, and you can't compare cannabis to alcohol or opiates or, you know, a range of other things. It has a really high safety profile. Yes, of course, things can be added and things can go wrong, but, you know, in the cannabis plant itself, it's incredibly safe. So in the United States, you do find a lot of people who are learning as they go. I've talked to doctors there, even paediatricians. You know, they're giving cannabis to children and they don't know everything yet, but it's trial and error. In Australia, I believe we're still waiting for the gold standard research that our government demands. You know, of course we won't know everything until all of that research is done. We believe that people will continue to access the green market and to go overseas until they can be guaranteed there is a bioequivalent, affordable product that's through their doctor, you know, in the normal way that any other medicine would be given. We know that there's a need for education of people with epilepsy in particular here. Cannabis is not a silver bullet for everybody. It's not going to fix every form of epilepsy. But wow, there are a range of people, you know, that have had benefits, and that's very, very clear. And, you know, you mentioned Queensland, so of course there are still some state and territory differences. They're improving, and, you know, the Commonwealth Government is trying to bring about sort of a more streamlined approach, improving, but we're still not there yet. And there's a Senate inquiry going on right now. People have been asked for submissions. Yesterday was the closing date. Epilepsy Action has put in a submission along with a lot of other people, and I'll be presenting to that Senate inquiry at the end of January. Next slide, please,
Carol,
Sister.
I'm just going to comment that actually in Queensland it only takes about 2 months to get the prescription.
About 2 months to get the prescription.
Tomorrow, Dr. T can talk on that.
Yeah, and look, in some areas, the Commonwealth Government now is actually giving approval within hours. It's actually, we're hearing from doctors, 2 hours later, I actually had the approval. Yeah. But there are still problems, and I'll certainly get to that. Now, these figures are out of date. So, you know, it said 6,000 prescriptions. It's more like 20,000 prescriptions that have been given out. That's prescriptions given out. That's not number of patients. So if you've got a script, you will have it for 3 months and then you'll have to refill it and so on. We also don't know how many prescriptions have been given out where the families can't afford to actually access it. And we know, anecdotally, we know of some. But, you know, it is estimated that between 100 and 200,000 people in Australia are using cannabis illicitly, and that's for medicinal purposes. So that's a very high number. And yes, there is still some work to be done in getting the states and territories working in the same way. Next slide, please, Sister. We do have a website, and I'm going to show you at least a little bit of information on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, but I'll probably cut it short. They're you know, going to take too much time to show it all to you, so I won't show them all. But if you're interested, go on to c4e.com.au and there is a host of information on there. This first little one, I think the video that we're going to get to next is actually, if you go to the next slide, sister. Oh, okay. I won't talk about this in detail. Just have a look on the video on the website, and it's self-explanatory. So next one again. Okay, you will see there are sections on learning about cannabis, accessing cannabis, and participating in research. And I've got a bit of exciting news that I'll actually share with you in a little while. Next slide. So this is about the endocannabinoid system. Have you all done your homework on understanding why cannabis works? Yeah, some yes. We might play this one, but I won't play lots of others. We'll play this one because I think if you want to see the science behind why cannabis is working with a number of conditions, you have to know you have an endocannabinoid system. And let's just play, see if this one will play for us.
For a long time, we have known the body has a number of systems, like the circulatory system and the lymphatic system. But only in the last few decades has the endocannabinoid system become a focus of research, broadening our understanding of its role in the body. This is a system that produces and uses endocannabinoids to regulate signalling and communication between the cells in the brain and the body. This is a nerve cell, known as a neuron, and is vital for taking messages between the brain and body. Signalling molecules travel between neighbouring neurons across a gap called a synapse. Endocannabinoids are one type of signalling molecule naturally made in the body. They travel across synapses to communicate information between neurons. They can be found throughout the body, especially in the brain, organs, connective tissues, glands, and immune cells. Anandamide and 2-AG are just two examples of endocannabinoids. To be able to pass messages between neurons, the endocannabinoids need to interact with cannabinoid receptors. These endocannabinoids and cannabinoid receptors perform different tasks, but the goal is always the same: to maintain a stable internal environment known as homeostasis. Two types of cannabinoid receptors are cannabinoid receptor 1, or CB1, and cannabinoid receptor 2, or CB2. CB1 receptors are primarily located on neurons, which are the key signalling cells of the brain and nervous system. They are associated with sleep, appetite, pain perception, and memory. CB2 receptors, although fewer in number, are found throughout the body and are associated with the immune system, where they influence pain, inflammation, and tissue damage. There are also a number of G-protein coupled receptors, which may also be involved in regulating the endocannabinoid system. Our bodies are making endocannabinoids all the time, knowing exactly when and how to make them. However, sometimes the endocannabinoid system may become dysregulated. Fortunately, research is discovering more about phytocannabinoids. These are cannabinoids naturally occurring in plants, which can interact with the human endocannabinoid system. To learn more about phytocannabinoids, view the C4E video, Understanding Cannabis.
So you have an endocannabinoid system. If you have a deficiency in your endocannabinoid system, you're going to be sick in some way. This is science. This is not make-believe. We've actually had all of the content for this video and other videos reviewed by the Lambert Initiative at the University of Sydney, and this is reality. But still, in a lot of courses for nurses, doctors, at the moment for medical students, this information is not in there yet. And so there's a really big catch-up is occurring. Next slide, please, sister. Yeah, no, we'll just skip that. There is a lot of research on the website should you want to see it. There's also information about what your situation is in each state or territory, what's legal, what's not. And next one, please, sister. I'll skip through some of these. And I won't play them all. As I said, if you go on to the site, you will see a lot of information then about the cannabis plant. But we'll just skip through, sister.
You want me to play that one?
Yeah, no, we'll just skip through. Okay, there's also information there if you want to try to get an application through government approval. There's information on there as to how to fill in application forms, what information to take to your doctor. So there's a whole lot of information there if you're wanting to try and actually navigate the system. Again, we'll just skip through. I know I'm watching the time, so we'll skip through. There's then one that explains carefully cannabis and epilepsy and shows you exactly what's going on there. Let's just hear though from some of the patients. We will play this one if that's okay.
Okay, the story. All right, give me a second.
It's the montage one.
The story.
It's hard. Epilepsy with my life.
Oh, it's going to freeze again, I think.
I just have seizures every now and then.
The seizures they're intractable in that we've trialled 6 different anti-epileptic medications, and there's been no control of seizures with those medications. So I really wanted to explore and find a way to access certified, regulated, consistent medicinal cannabis.
All the medication that I'm on hasn't worked, and I'd like to give cannabis oil a trial.
She's on the top range of medications, so she can't take any more medication, and we're looking to try and find something that will give her a better quality of life.
And so I was eventually successful in finding a neurologist that would help me to source a product.
It'll be within the next couple of months she will be able to access it. Her neurologist has been approved to prescribe it.
The only, I guess, bad point, if there is a bad point in this trial, is the cost.
Yeah.
It's a third of the price in Canada.
Is $1,000 a vial, and that's 2 drops under the tongue.
It might not be perfect, but it's worth having a go.
We're hoping, against hope, that it will be an avenue for Emma.
I think I will be getting heaps better.
All I want to be able to do is access a product on a regular basis that I can afford to give Liam his life back.
Loving parents that just want their young children to have a chance at life. On the C4E website, there is actually a range of stories, some of which have been sent in by people, just telling their own story. So this is a very balanced website. It has the science, it has the information from the government and so on, but it also has the patient stories. Next slide, please, sister. Okay, this is just recognising some supporters, and yes, we have received some pharmaceutical money to put the website up. Let me say we are completely neutral. My friends from the University of Sydney calls me the honest broker. We will never promote particular products, be they licit or illicit. We will just give people honest information and try to assist them as best we can. And that's, I think, taken us to the final slide. And I just want to encourage you to get in touch if you would like to. A really exciting piece of news that I haven't shared anywhere yet, and I thought about, will I actually say something here or will I not? When I go to different symposiums, and I've spoken at the convention centres in Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney, and I've been to WA and so on. And we've exhibited, Epilepsy Action has had a stand at most of the hemp expos and so on. People come up and talk to us because we're usually the only non-profit in the health area anywhere in sight. You don't actually yet see people that represent the other health conditions for which cannabis might be useful. So we find ourselves talking to people with MS and Tourette syndrome and cancer and, chronic pain and so on. Myself and the nurses who work for me have needed to educate ourselves to talk about epilepsy. And in educating ourselves to talk about epilepsy, we've really learnt a lot about cannabis. We've learned about drug-to-drug interactions and, to be careful with certain things and so on. So we will be launching later this year a new service that is, if you like, C for P, Cannabis for Patients, broadly. We'll be launching a website called CanAction. So we're going actually broader than epilepsy and saying let's help people out there with all sorts of conditions, help them as best we can to navigate the field at the moment of medicinal cannabis, have the information they need. If it's with their doctors, help their doctors, just make sure that people have whatever information that they require. So watch for that space. If you know the Epilepsy Action Australia website or the Facebook page, we'll be launching that in due course. You'll hear about it. And so for any condition, please feel free to come and talk to us. Thank you. I think I've probably run out of time there. So been great to talk with you. I love to visit Nimbin. It's a great place to come to. Unfortunately, as Michael said, my clinical nurse consultant is really out of action in hospital at the moment, but we're willing to talk to anybody that needs assistance at any time, and thank you so much.
So is it true that you weren't into cannabis when I first met you? Is that right? So I'm such an optimist about cannabis, I can't even remember those bits. But I've been in Nimbin more than 30 years, I know this is super safe as a medicine. It's extraordinary what the pharmaceutical industry, the TGA and the government is making us go through to prove whatever. Anyway, that's their rules. The TGA, of course, is really... the whole board would be pharmaceutical representatives, I imagine. So it's a whole industry that you're trying to crack. It's very difficult. But Carol, anyway, I didn't know we had to win you over. It wasn't very hard. But she's become a great advocate and helped a lot of people and all your boards and bits and pieces. So appreciate your work.
Pleasure, Michael.
Good on you. Now I've got Dr. Pott here, Andrew Catalaris. He's in the audience. He's been listening closely to everything you said. He's an absolute hero for me. He's really Australia's pioneer on cannabis from when he was a teenager.